The rain drummed steadily against the windows of the small, unassuming diner, blurring the neon sign that flickered above its door, Maggie's Place. Inside, the warm, greasy air clung to every surface, an almost comforting contrast to the storm outside. It wasn't the kind of place that welcomed high-profile customers, and certainly not the kind of place one expected to see Barron Trump. Yet there he was, tall and composed, stepping through the door with a damp coat folded over one arm, and droplets of rain still glistening in his tousled hair. Barron looked out of place, though not in the way one might expect. His designer sweater and tailored slacks contrasted sharply with the cracked linoleum floor and the faded vinyl booths, but it was something in his expression that stood out more in intangible weariness, as though he carried more weight than his years ought to allow. He paused in the entryway, scanning the diner with a practiced coolness, before his gaze settled on a booth in the far corner. Quiet, empty, just what he needed. Emily was wiping down the counter when she first noticed him. She didn't recognize him immediately, though something about him seemed familiar. Maybe it was his height, or the self-contained air that clung to him like an aura. But she had long since learned not to dwell on such things. Patrons came and went, each bringing their own burden, their own stories they were unlikely to share. And she had enough of her own troubles to carry. Still, she couldn't help but linger as he approached, her rag motionless in her hand. He didn't look like the typical customer. Not a truck driver looking for a quick bite, or a local pulling in to escape the rain. No, there was something different about him. She straightened her posture, the exhaustion in her limbs momentarily forgotten, and gave him a polite smile as he slid into the booth. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice steady but soft. Barron nodded. "Black, please." She turned to fetch the coffee pot, but even as she moved, she felt his presence, as though he carried a gravity that bent the air around him. And for the first time in a long while, Emily wondered about a stranger's story. The diner had emptied out as the rain outside began to ease, leaving behind the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the soft clatter of dishes being stacked behind the counter. Emily moved quietly between the tables, clearing plates and wiping surfaces with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this far too many times before. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of another long shift, and the faint shadows under her eyes told a story she wouldn't dare speak aloud. Barron sat quietly in the corner, watching her as he nursed the last sip of his coffee. She hadn't said much beyond the basics. "More coffee? Do you need anything else?" But he could sense the weariness in her voice, the kind that came from more than just physical exhaustion. He had always been good at reading people, a skill honed through years of navigating complex dynamics. Emily's struggles weren't loud, but they were written in her slouched posture, her tired smile, and the way she moved, as though the weight of the world clung to her ankles. As she passed by his table to refill his coffee cup, he caught her eye for a moment. "You've had a long day," he said, his voice low and genuine. Emily blinked, startled by the observation. She replied with a weak laugh, quickly looking away. She was used to blending into the background, not being noticed. Barron didn't press further. Instead, as she walked away, he pulled out his wallet and reached for a crisp $100 bill. Placing it on the edge of the table, he hesitated for a moment before taking out a pen and scribbling something on the back of a napkin. His handwriting was neat, almost formal, but his words were simple. "Keep your head up. Better days are coming." When Emily returned to clear his table, Barron was already gone. Her eyes fell to the bill first, and her breath hitched. She hadn't seen a tip like that in years, if ever. Then her gaze caught the folded napkin, and with trembling fingers, she picked it up. She read the note once, then twice, before clutching it to her chest. For the first time that night, the heaviness in her shoulders seemed to lift, and as she stared out into the rain-slicked street, a small, genuine smile crossed her lip. Emily stood frozen by the booth, the crumpled napkin in one hand and the $100 bill in the other. The diner's hum seemed to fade, the world narrowing to just the message on the napkin. Better days are coming. Her vision blurred, and for a moment she thought she might cry, but she didn't. Instead, she inhaled a sharp, trembling breath and lowered herself into the seat Barron had occupied just moments before, the weight of his kindness pressing heavily against her chest. The $100 was more than just money, it was hope. She mentally calculated what it could cover: groceries for the week, a partial payment on her rent, or even a small dent in the mounting hospital bills that had been haunting her every waking moment. Her younger brother's treatments weren't getting any cheaper, and the landlord's warnings about one last chance had become a haunting refrain in her head. She had spent countless nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she'd lose everything. But this gesture, this unexpected kindness, felt like the universe had thrown her a lifeline. And yet, as relief and gratitude began to settle in, another emotion crept in: confusion. Why? Why would someone like Hema Man, who, judging by his quiet demeanor and composed presence, clearly belonged to a different world, care about someone like her? People who came into the diner rarely saw her at all. To most, she was just the waitress, a blur of motion, delivering coffee refills and clearing plates. But this man had noticed her, seen the quiet cracks in her armor, the exhaustion she fought to hide. Her fingers tightened around the napkin as she read his words again. Better days are coming. Was it possible he truly believed that? A tear slipped down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away, glancing around the empty diner as if afraid someone might see her vulnerability. She folded the napkin carefully and slipped it into her pocket. She would keep it, not just as a reminder of this moment, but as proof that kindness could still find her, even in the darkest times. Looking out at the rain-slicked street where Barron had disappeared, Emily whispered to herself, "Thank you." And for the first time in weeks, she felt like maybe, just maybe, the better days he promised weren't so far away. The next evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under a pale gray sky. Inside the diner, Emily moved with the same quiet efficiency, though her steps seemed lighter, her shoulders less burdened. She had slipped the folded napkin into her apron pocket that morning, as if keeping it close might make the message feel truer. She wasn't sure why, but the simple act of rereading those words, "Better days are coming," had carried her through the day. The soft jingle of the door's bell snapped her from her thoughts. She glanced up from the counter and froze. There he was, again, Barron Trump. His tall frame filled the doorway, his coat draped neatly over one arm. He hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, his expression calm but purposeful. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know whether to feel gratitude or confusion, but before she could decide, he was already making his way toward the same booth he'd occupied the night before. "You're back," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and uncertainty as she approached his table. He offered a small, disarming smile. "I wanted to check on you," he replied simply. Her brow furrowed. "Check on me? Why?" Barron leaned back slightly, his gaze steady but unassuming. "Because I know what it feels like," he said after a pause, his voice soft but sure. "To feel invisible, to struggle quietly while the rest of the world keeps moving, unaware." Emily blinked, caught off guard by the honesty in his words. She asked, incredulous. "But you're?" She stopped herself, unsure how to finish this. His name and face had been plastered across headlines for years. He was someone the world couldn't ignore. He seemed to read her thoughts. "People see the name, the family, the image," he said, gesturing, "but they don't see me. Sometimes, being noticed for the wrong reasons feels worse than not being noticed at all. I could tell you were carrying something heavy. I just wanted you to know that someone saw." Emily swallowed hard, her throat tightening with emotion. She nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. Barron gave her a small, sincere smile. "We all need a little kindness sometime, even when we don't ask." And for the first time in a long while, Emily felt seen not as a struggling waitress, but as a person who mattered. The diner had never been this crowded. It wasn't customers filling the booths, but reporters with cameras, microphones, and notepads, all jostling for space in the modest establishment. The neon sign above Maggie's place flickered as flashes lit up the glass door, and the low hum of conversation was drowned out by the chaos outside. Emily stood behind the counter, stunned, gripping the edge of the register as she watched the frenzy unfold. She had no idea how it had happened, how Barron's quiet gesture of kindness the night before had spiraled into this media circus. Maybe it was someone at the diner who had recognized him and tipped off the press, or maybe the story had simply traveled, amplified by whispers and social media. Whatever the case, the attention felt overwhelming. Barron Trump entered the diner as calmly as if he were walking into a quiet cafe. His tall frame moved through the crowd with a kind of effortless composure, his face neutral but focused. The reporters immediately swarmed him, bombarding him with questions. "Barron, why did you help her? Was this a publicity stunt? What does your family think of this?" He raised a hand, his voice quiet but firm as he spoke over the chaos. "I'll answer your questions," he said. "But I won't let this become a spectacle. Let's step outside." The reporters hesitated, surprised by his control, but eventually followed him out to the sidewalk, leaving Emily and the diner staff staring after. Through the windows, she watched as Barron stood in the middle of the crowd, the rain-soaked street glistening around him. "Why did you do it?" One reporter called out again. Barron's expression softened, but his voice carried an unshakable weight. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "Kindness isn't about grand gestures. It's about noticing people when they feel invisible. It's about doing what you can, even if it's small, because sometimes that's all someone needs to hold on for another day." The crowd fell silent, his words cutting through the noise like a sharp wind. He paused, letting the message sink in before continuing. "I didn't help Emily to make headlines. I did it because I saw someone struggling and knew I could help. That's it. And if this moment inspires someone else to do the same, then it was." Back inside, Emily watched with tears in her eyes as the reporters shifted from pressing him for details to listening truly. His words hung in the air long after he'd finished, leaving a mark far greater than the fleeting chaos of a media frenzy. The diner felt different in the days following Barron Trump's visit. The air, once heavy with the weight of weary silence, now seemed to hum with quiet optimism. Emily couldn't explain it, but she felt it in the way customers lingered just a little longer to ask her how her day was going. She saw it in the tips left on tables larger than usual, folded neatly next to napkins, scribbled with notes of encouragement. "Stay strong. You're doing great. Don't give." At first, it overwhelmed her. The attention, the kindness, the idea that her struggles, her life, had become a story people cared about it, all felt surreal. She had spent so long blending into the background, working tirelessly just to keep her head above water. That being seen felt almost uncomfortable. But little by little, she began to She kept Barron's note tucked safely in her wallet, reading it when the world felt too heavy. His simple words, "Keep your head up, better days are coming," became a mantra, a lifeline. And somehow, they seemed to be coming true. The tips helped her buy groceries without anxiety. The notes from customers reminded her that she wasn't as alone as she'd once thought. Each small gesture became a brick in the foundation of her renewed. But the biggest change came one quiet afternoon, when a woman in a tailored suit walked into the diner. Emily didn't notice her at first. The lunch rush had just passed, and she was busy clearing tables, her apron dusted with crumbs. The woman waited patiently at the counter, her posture poised but approachable. "Excuse me," the woman said softly, catching Emily's attention. Emily turned, flashing her polite waitress smile. "Hi there. Can I get you some?" The woman shook her head, a kind smile spreading across her face. "Actually, I'm here for..." Emily froze, her brow furrowing. "For me? My name is Rebecca Turner," the woman explained, extending her hand. "I work with the Horizon Foundation. We saw the story about Barron Trump's visit, and I wanted to meet you personally." Emily blinked, momentarily at a loss for words. I'm sorry, I don't understand." Rebecca's smile deepened with warmth. "We specialize in helping people who show resilience in the face of adversity. Your story moved us. We know you've been working hard to provide for your son, and we also know you had to leave your nursing degree unfinished." She paused, letting her words sink. "We'd like to offer you a scholarship, full tuition, living expenses covered, everything you'd need to go back to school and finish your degree. For a moment, Emily could only stare, her mind racing to catch up. "Are you serious?" she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca nodded, completely serious. "We believe in investing in people who have the potential to make a difference. And from everything we've heard, you're one of those." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as the words settled over her. She thought of the nights spent studying by the dim light of her desk lamp, the years of dreaming about becoming a nurse before life had derailed her plan. She thought of her son, Ethan, and the future she wanted to give him, a future she had almost given up. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Her voice cracked. Rebecca placed a hand on Emily's arm. "Say yes," she said gently, "and let us help you build the life you deserve." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face now. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Yes, absolutely." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. Emily gave her notice at the diner, something she had never dared to dream of doing before. Her co-workers, many of whom had become like family, threw her a small farewell party on her last day, complete with a store-bought cake and heartfelt hug. "You're going to be amazing," her manager said, squeezing her shoulder. "We'll miss you, but you were meant for bigger things." With the Horizon Foundation's support, Emily enrolled in a nearby nursing program. They arranged childcare for Ethan, covered her tuition, and even helped her find a small but comfortable apartment closer to campus. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was drowning. At first, returning to school felt daunting. She hadn't been in a classroom in years, and juggling coursework with parenting was no small but as the days turned into weeks, Emily found herself thriving. She devoured her textbooks, participated eagerly in lectures, and formed friendships with other students who shared her passion for helping others. Her professors noticed her drive and dedication, often commending her for her insightful questions and her ability to connect theory with real-world empathy. Slowly but surely, Emily began to believe in herself again. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was building a future. Through it all, Barron Trump remained a quiet but ever-present figure in her mind. She often wondered about him, about why he had chosen to help her, and what his life must be. Despite the media frenzy that had briefly surrounded his act of kindness, he hadn't sought any further attention. He had simply disappeared back into his world, leaving behind a ripple effect that continued to shape her. One evening, as she was tucking Ethan into bed, he asked her a question that brought tears to her eyes. "Mom," he said, his small voice muffled by the blankets, "do you think I'll meet the nice man who helped you one?" Emily smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Maybe," she said softly, "but even if we don't, we can still remember what he taught. To always be kind, no matter what." Ethan nodded, his eyes already fluttering closed. "I want to be kind, too," he murmured, before drifting off to sleep. As Emily approached graduation, she often thought about how much had changed in such a short time. The once overwhelming burden of her struggles had been replaced by a sense of purpose and direction. She had found strength she didn't know she had, and had built a community of people who believed in her, professors, classmates, and even strangers who had been touched by her story. When she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, she thought of Ethan, clapping wildly from the audience. She thought of the customers who had left her words of encouragement, and the Horizon Foundation for believing in her potential. But most of all, she thought of Barron Trump, whose small gesture had set everything in motion. Emily knew she might never get the chance to thank him in person, but she carried his kindness with her every day. It became the foundation of her new journey, inspiring her to pay it forward whether it was listening to a struggling patient, helping a fellow student, or simply offering a smile to someone who looked like they needed it. Emily made kindness the cornerstone of her life. Her journey wasn't without its challenges, but for the first time, she felt equipped to face them. She had hope, she had purpose, and she had a future she had once thought was out of reach. And though Barron remained a mystery, she often found herself silently thanking him, imagining what she might say if their paths ever crossed again. "Thank you," she would tell him, "for seeing me when I thought no one could, for showing me that even the smallest act of kindness can change everything." Because it had. And as Emily moved forward into this new chapter of her life, she carried that truth with her light that would guide her, no matter how dark the world might seem.